Are you coming to the tree where dead men called out for his love to flee?
Meantime, our next guest, Colonel MacGregor, issuing this ominous warning. Quote, in Ukraine, Washington underestimated Russian resolve and military power. Washington should not repeat this mistake by underestimating the potential for a regional Muslim alliance that could threaten Israel's existence. The possibility that Israel could end up like Ukraine should not be discounted. Retired Army Colonel, combat vet, former advisor to SecDef, and now the CEO of a new organization, Our Country, Our Choice, our good friend, Colonel Doug MacGregor. So why isn't the Biden regime talking ceasefire like we've been saying for months they should have been doing between Ukraine and Russia?
Dan, I think there's a huge problem inside the Beltway. It's not limited to President Biden. I think it's widespread, and that is too many people in Washington think it's really 1991, and it's not. The armed forces that existed in 1991 really don't exist anymore. We have very little depth. In baseball terms, we have a weak bench. We can't recruit for the United States Army. Frankly speaking, we're having trouble recruiting for everybody but the Air Force. And everybody else, frankly, is not getting the people that they want. So that's problem number one. We are not what we were militarily in 91. Number two, we're structured in theory to fight one major war and support one lesser contingency. The truth is we're not even structured for one major war. We've dismantled most of our capability to fight over the last 20 years. We're in a lot of trouble right now. The Israelis have mobilized a force that's larger than the United States Army, but they're facing a very different set of threats today, different technologies, different weapons. The region is not what it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. The region is armed to the teeth, and everyone in the region is watching the film footage coming out of Gaza, showing children that have been wounded, children that are being dug out from the rubble, watching the refugee flow. No one in the region is going to sit still and watch the Israelis pulverize Gaza and drive the population out into the desert. Right. It's not going to happen. Right now, they are on the path to suicide in that region. The Turks will come into this war, and the Turkish armies are large and powerful. They can field 2 million men in a month.
Whoa.
We're not even talking about Iran. Iran has already stood up militias all over Iraq, Syria, and in southern Lebanon. Those militias are deadly. We're talking about Hezbollah has 100,000 men. Hezbollah has at least 130,000 rockets, of which 40 to 50,000 are very precise and extremely lethal. The damage they can do is damage that will take decades to repair. We don't want it. And what they've all said is if the Israelis refrain from invading Gaza, quote unquote, to finish off Hamas, well, then they won't go to a war footing. We don't want a war, and we need to come to terms with the reality. Assigning the Israeli Defense Force the mission of cleaning out Gaza and finding all of the Hamas fighters is mission impossible. Military power is not the answer.
You've been a commander of troops. If Israel was listening to you and Bibi said, Colonel, what should I have them to do? Because we need some sort of retribution for the thousands of Israeli lives lost and 32 Americans killed. What should they do somehow to try and root out Hamas and get them out of there without a full-fledged just demolition of the Strip?
Well, they've already killed more than 2,000 Arabs in Gaza. I mean, that's probably a modest estimate. They already killed the 1,500 Hamas fighters that found their way into Israel. So the people that perpetrated most of the atrocious crimes that we saw committed in Israel are dead. And then the thousands in Hamas and out of Hamas, just citizens in Gaza, have paid a terrible price. Collective punishment breeds new enemies. The enemies don't vanish, they get worse. And Hamas is not so much people as it is an idea. And it's an idea that is made much more attractive by the brutality meted out to them in the aftermath of these attacks. It's easy to recruit people when their families are killed, when their homes are destroyed. Recruiting is not a problem.
Great point.
Recruiting on the West Bank for more terrorism is not a problem. and getting the rest of the region involved is not a problem. We need to remember Egypt and Israel have had good relations. Israel wants nothing to do with a war. But if Gaza is subjected to the kind of punishment that Netanyahu wants to mete out, the Egyptians are going to have a tough time staying out of it. And if they get involved in it, you're going to see everybody else pile on. We don't want it. We can't afford it. We're bankrupt. No one wants to admit the truth. We don't have the forces or the means to deal with this.
Right.
B-52 strikes aren't going to solve this. Our aircraft flying from carriers won't solve this. And we don't have the ground troops to put in there.